We FM is SVG.
27 minutes on to 11 o'clock here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. You're locked on to WeFM 99.9 Clean Fresh Sound, and this is your It's Your Turn program. Remember, It's Your Turn is an interactive program, so the numbers to call are 457 9997 if you're calling from a local landline, 532 9997 if you're calling from a digital cell phone, and you can also call us or send us a message on WhatsApp at 457 9997. The It's Your Turn program is being hosted by Mr. Cecil Ryan and Mr. Philbert John. Good morning to you, Cecil.
Good morning to you, Karen, and good morning to Philbert, and good morning to all our listeners on the WeFM, the Clean Fresh Sound, the WeFM platforms, and the Star Radio platforms, Star FM, and by extension, the Garifuna, if you're listening to us via Garifuna. Good morning to you, and we want to wish you a very peaceful and happy June 8th day. Today's June 8th. And so we want to wish you all the best. And we thank you for spending the time and allowing us to come into your living room, your vehicle, wherever you're listening to us this morning. We greet you very warmly and we're happy to be with you. Turn over to Pijan as I'll come back to say more later about the program. Pijan?
Yes, thank you very much, Cecil, and good morning, Kieran. Good morning to all of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And all the extend special greetings to two persons, Ms. Ishbel Brown, a long-standing member of JC's.
Okay.
Met me, made her comments about the program, generally positive. And also Nigel Zero Frederick from Barley, former colleague, who also contacted me and, made comments about the program. We heard from them in a while. So greetings. And greetings to all other persons listening to WeFM wherever you are, in neighboring territories, in the wider diaspora. And Cecilia, an interesting program today, right?
Yes, I look forward to that program.
Okay.
Well, you could say what it is.
We're going to look at the issue of polling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And we have the distinguished Caribbean pollster and political and social scientist, Mr. Peter Wickham, on with us this morning.
I hope that our listeners go away with a better understanding of why they are held and how they are conducted.
Right.
And what we can learn from polling generally.
Mm-hmm. We don't have Joel with us this morning. He's out. So we were going to. He indicated that he will be listening to the program. He's unable to make it in. So hopefully, if he's listening and has any question to pose, he may wish to do that. Certainly, I also, given that we're going to be talking about polling and statistics and so on, I know that our colleague from always, Lansford Weeks, he might be listening, and I'm sure we want to extend also invitation to him if he wishes to call at any point. He knows that he's free to call at any point in time. So I want to just remind him that we be good to have a call from him at some point in the program. Yes, but in the meantime, Pigeon, as usual, so there's some preliminary matters that I would like to get out of the way. But before we do, I just want to give a warm shout out to. But let me just first remind our listeners that It's Your Turn is the premier discussion program in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And in fact, our good friend and colleague, Dr. Cliff Scott, even says in the Eastern Caribbean. And I know that when I speak with Lansford from time to time, Lansford would say it can be compared with any he listens to in Jamaica. So we are happy for that. And talking about that, I want to also say that there are some few really who try to make our program go along the line of hatred and to introduce and try to inject confusion sometimes and those kind of things into the program. I just want to urge them, if they call the program, which they're willing to do, it's because we believe in democracy, freedom of speech, we all of that, but we also believe in, we also hold to decency in exchange and respect for fellow men. So when you call the program, we respect you, and we would urge you to call with that kind of sense of being part of the discussion. Having said that, I just want to say as well, Pijan, I attended the annual general meeting of the Bank of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I met there, you won't believe, you would believe, the top civil servant in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who is the Mr. Jackson, the Director General of Finance and Planning.
Seen all of it.
But he listens to us all the time. He told me. So we had a exchange where I was urging him also to make calls. He said he rather listen. So he listens to us. He listens to the program.
Talking about top civil servants, we have 3 at the same level. Top, you know who they are?
No, I don't know. I know Jackson.
Attorney General.
Yeah. Oh yes, yeah, he's a civil
Chief
servant.
Medical Officer.
That's right.
And the Director General of Finance and Planning.
Yeah, Mr. Edmund Jackson. Yeah. A Mespo man. So greetings, Brother Jackson. Greetings to you, and I hope you're listening this morning. So yeah, we have people, and somebody else I found out with some surprise. He listens to the program. I know there's a gentleman in the States who listens and gives. Well, there's so many people in the States who listen, but this gentleman in particular, he was listening to last week's program, and he made observation, and he gave some suggestion as to where the focus could be, So some point in time, I want to share some of those ideas. But just to greet all those folks who listen to us, and we know that our program, not only those people who respond on Facebook, and we welcome you, and we appreciate your response on Facebook. But Pijan, it occurred to me for some time now that a large bulk, maybe the largest bulk of our listeners are people who listen basically through their radios, air to air. That is AIR to EAR kind of thing. People like Miss Harold. Good morning to Miss Harold. We hope you're doing well this morning. People like our brother from Layu, Brother Mason. Good morning, Brother Mason. And we hope you're doing well this morning. And so many different persons. I remember the other day I was good while now, I was in Fancy, and I met this gentleman. He shouted me and said, "Oh, he listens to us all the time." So we are the premier radio interactive program in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. There's no doubt about that. And through the Clean Fresh Sound, WeFM, which is indeed the most progressive radio station in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in terms of ideas, programming, and so on and so forth. The cleanest, of course, also. So yeah, Pijan, I just want to hail up all the folks. I call one or two by name, but everybody knows that we appreciate them, and we look forward to their involvement with us on Sundays at this time. Pijan, last week just before we left the program, or was it towards the end anyway, I saw a message from our good friend and colleague Kojo, alerting us that Rasai had passed. And I wasn't too sure, but somehow I'd forgotten. So I just want to this morning use the occasion to express condolence to his loved ones, his main ones. And I know that you had called me too as well Sunday after the program to say that you picked it up. So you may wish to.
Yes, I want to extend also condolences to his family. Mm-hmm. And I remember him as a very passionate caller to our
Very.
program.
Very.
He took issues very seriously and expressed it accordingly.
Yeah.
And I really want to extend condolences to his family. That's one of we will definitely miss
Yes, for sure.
in terms of a regular caller.
Mhm.
And another important figure in the Vincentian culture and other happenings is Shivamba Rose.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
right. Yeah.
Shivamba Rose also passed.
Yes.
Um,
And Shivamba, just for listeners' sake, is brother to
brother
Renwick
to
Rose,
Renwick Rose and
Dexter Rose,
Dexter Rose.
and also Lafon Keto.
Lafon
So we
Keto,
want
yes.
to
Yeah.
express condolence to them, of course, Pijan.
He was a serious activist,
Mhm.
writer, columnist at certain points. Also, he published a magazine at one stage in his life. Very, very,
Flair?
very active.
Was
yeah.
it Flair?
Flair.
Flair, yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And always in conversation, quite an engaging character.
Hmm.
You will be missed.
Yeah. So yeah, condolence to his loved ones. Yeah, Pigeon. Again, just to note that the program last week generated a lot of reactions. I don't know if anybody talked to you about the program, but they commended ASP Panel Brown for the way he handled things on the program, and his knowledge of the whole thing of traffic. All of that was good, but again, there are some issues raised from the program and issues that other people have raised, which need immediate attention. Some simple issues, and I noticed that was it Thursday night? Yeah, there was a serious disruption of traffic in the Villa area, where one person complained to me that she was directed to go via, I think, the Villa area there, Villa Glen, and she had no idea where she was going. Again, we keep making the point. Signage, road signage is so important. Could you imagine somebody who is traveling, a visitor,
Yes.
traveling to the airport to catch in a rental vehicle to catch his or her thing and get stuck. I mean, these are, St. Vincent's.
It doesn't even have to be a rental. It could be an ordinary citizen.
Anybody, yeah.
Because these are not bypass you take on a regular basis. Something we're driving for decades and never ever use certain roads.
Certain roads, yeah. I mean, some of us happen to know our way wrong because we use those, we go to those places regularly. But the majority of people, certainly drivers, and in particular some younger drivers, especially women, who don't know these various bypass roads, and so we need to back up. We're in international space right now.
This is also related to signage. Is also the question of care.
Yeah.
Of these signs.
Mm-hmm.
People deliberately vandalize them sometimes.
They do. Well, yeah, because we don't give that appreciation to the public, that signs are so important, and they need to be internationalized.
Yeah,
In other words, the standard has to be international, because that's where we are. That's where St. Vincent and the Grenadines is right now. Like last week, Wednesday, I went to the airport and to drop somebody. And Pigeon, I tell you, the reception hall was packed. I mean, packed to capacity of incoming passengers. And a lot of them seem to have been heading to the Premier Hotel right now in St. Vincent and Grenadines, because I noticed they were going up to a particular point. And that is what's happening. And we have to up our game in terms of traffic, the management of traffic, the road how you use the road, how people use the road, and even this morning while driving into the studio, I noticed the roads were extremely busy, and that is becoming the norm. And so we really have to up our games. The Ministry of Transport, whoever they are in there, the authorities need to buck up. Certainly, this is budget time, so if you don't have the funds now, put it in the budget for next year. We got to move. We got to move at the time. We can't really, and the way we drive and so on, there needs to be a higher level of enforcement, higher level in every respect. And so that last week's discussion was timely, it was focused, and we need to move on from there. A lot of issues were raised in that discussion last week, even things that we don't have in place, they need to be addressed.
One of the things that struck me is the point made by ASP Brown that quite a number of the activities that we have concern about, legislation is not yet in place to address them.
That's terrible, man.
And although he said that updated legislation is in the draft stage, how long will that take? And we need to do something about speeding up the modernization of the traffic laws.
For sure.
Yeah. I was surprised to learn that although we have expressed concern about the tinting, the degree of tinting in some vehicles, the legislation is not there to address it.
And you remember over maybe a year ago, the Prime Minister spoke about that on this program, this very program. You know, so, and the way when he spoke, I thought there was some urgency about it. But the legislation, as you said, Peter, is not there yet, according to ASP Brown.
And I was also struck about I think it's a small number in relation to the traffic on the road. The number of designated traffic officers.
Yeah, 24, he said 24 to serve 35,000. And I'm sure it's more now.
Which you could tell that most of it tend to be on the road at any given time, particularly during peak hours.
And it's more now because I believe since that figure was since they reached that figure, a lot of vehicles have come in, and they continue to come in great numbers. So
do you support the notion of restricting importation?
Well, I don't know. That's a difficult one. I don't know how you can do that. Well, maybe in time that we might have to get to that point, you know. But it's a challenging one. Anyway,
and would, as you would in our news again,
for
having vehicles use other areas rather than Kingston.
Oh, having them use other areas?
Let other areas be built up.
Oh, are you talking about urban areas outside of Kingston?
Outside of Kingston, rather than getting into town to do something.
Oh, you mean like somebody made a suggestion that vehicles may drive to Arnorsville Park and then take public transportation or pooling into Kingston. But I don't know that that's going to solve the problem. I doubt. But it may help, but I don't know.
Kingston is established and it will be the main center for some time to come.
Mm-hmm. But right now, other centers are popping up.
Yeah.
There's the same Arnorsville. There is Diamond is now becoming an important center. A lot of commerce in Diamond, and people are moving to reside around that area. On the Leeward side, there is Camden Park, the same area, and then the Bookament area. So, whatever it is, urgent attention needs to be given to dealing with all of these. Anyway, in the meantime, Pijan, we're going to open up for a main discussion in a while. But in the meantime, I attended the Bank of St. Vincent and the Grenadines AGM last Wednesday, it was, I think, anyway. And I was pleased with what I was hearing, the reports, particularly the financial report, the statement of the financial position of the bank is really, it's a really glowing one. And I just want to, for example, the figure, the assets from between 2023 and 2024 grew by about 12.5%. That's massive. So the bank is doing well, extremely well, to the point where the bank, the board declared and confirmed by the shareholders a dividend of $1.17, and that's fantastic. The bank is doing well, and I really want to commend the board and the CEO in particular, in terms of the staff, Mr. Williams, and the staff generally for the hard work.
The dividend. What percentage of share value is that?
I think it's 50%.
Of share value?
No, sorry. The dividend is what percent of share value?
Of the value of shares, yeah.
Oh, I'll have to calculate that. But the overall surplus, 50% is distributed.
Okay.
To shareholders, and which gives them $1.17. So the bank
$1.17 for each
share,
each share that you own.
To each share that you own.
Okay. So what I was trying to figure out is that each share, what is the value of each share at the moment?
Oh, and like if it's on, I don't know what that is. You'd have to perhaps check the Eastern Caribbean, the Eastern Caribbean Bank for that. Maybe that's where it is. I'm not sure. But the bank, those who are in the bank would know the value. But it has appreciated significantly over the years. So yeah, they've done well, and I just want to commend the board, the staff, in particular the management, and in particular Mr. Williams, who is the CEO, Terry Williams. And I also want to commend, they had election, well, for one person, a replacement for Dr. Anyway, one replacement on the board is our own Willis Williams.
Okay.
There was no other nominee on the floor, so he was the only nominee and got on to the board. So I want to commend him, Willis, for getting onto the board of the Bank of St. Vincent and Grenadines. I'm sure he's going to add to the expertise and to the ability of the bank to do what they need to do, particularly in the area of security. I know Willis has a lot of skills in terms of computer skills and related electronics, so he would add to their decision making on the board.
And the technological environment is both a challenge and an opportunity
right now,
especially with something called AI and that kind of thing,
and cyber crime, cyber security. Yeah, so he'd been a good addition to the board. So I want to commend him, coming from. Well, he's an important person in our chat, in our group, Isiatan group. Yeah. And Pijan, I was saying to you sorry, you go.
Yeah, in terms of sporting activities during the period, I haven't been following much, but I understand that our students in Grenada for the Whitsuntide have been doing well.
Yes, in fact, in the 100, I noticed, can't remember the names of the youngsters, two of them, first and second. I didn't get the times, but they're doing well. They seem to be doing well, Pijan. Which is good. I hope they continue. I don't know who the coaches are for those youngsters, but.
And our swimmers did well in Barbados recently. And Vincey Heat,
man.
seemed to be on a roll.
Yeah. Yeah, they did well against Anguilla. They should be playing, is it the Bahamas? I
Not
think,
so sure.
yeah, the next match is against the Bahamas. And in fact, the Bahamas was beaten. Sorry, the Bahamas won against Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is supposed to be a strong team, but well, I believe, according if you were to believe the coach, the Vincent is up to the challenge. So we expect good things of them. The only thumbs down sporting area is the West Indies. I don't even want to mention them. And funny enough, the people are calling for significant changes from the top down. You know, that's where it is now. I was looking at some people talking in Trinidad, and some simple mistake apparently have been made, and so people, in terms of the management, and so people are calling for heads to roll. I noticed that so Andy Roberts from, that fast bowler from Antigua, he described them as jokers. He described the whole West Indies bunch as jokers. That's what he did. I saw it on Facebook, and somebody repeated it. So, yeah. Well, maybe one of these days things might change, and we might get back to the olden days of the glory days of West Indies cricket. Don't know.
In the meantime, look at some clips,
Yes.
some vintage clips.
Yeah.
To
Clive Lloyd's performance in 1975 in that ODI match, for example, against Australia. That's one to look at, And a lot of people, including myself, that's what I do. Somebody's calling, but I'm not going to take calls in between. I learned from last week when somebody tried to inject or infuse irrelevant discussion into the program. But it's about Pigeon. It's now about the time. Oh, I haven't seen Peter in yet. So maybe we still. Oh yes, he's there. Yeah. So we can we just go right into engaging Peter now. So as we said at the very beginning of the program, our main topic this morning would be looking at polling polling generally, but more particularly, I would ask Peter about St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So again, a very distinguished scholar, and in particular, pollster and social scientist in the Caribbean. We are very pleased to have with us on our program this morning, for the second time for the year, actually, Mr. Peter Wickham. Peter, good morning to you and welcome to the program.
Morning, Cecil, and morning, Philbert. Gentlemen, I'm happy to be with you. Happy Sunday.
Sorry, go ahead.
I said, good morning, gentlemen, and happy Sunday.
Oh, yes, happy Sunday to you as well. Yeah. We don't have Joel in studio. He couldn't make it, and he promised that he would be listening, so wherever he is. Okay. But we are very pleased to have you.
Yeah, and I'm happy to be with you again to clarify some misconceptions and hopefully we have an engaging conversation.
All right, great. Well, just off the bat, in the week past, I was hearing that you did a poll for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and that poll was showing a significant, to be specific, 10 for the NDP and 5 for the ULP. And you may wish to make a comment on that, and then we can go from there.
Okay. Yeah, well, at the outset, let me say that nothing could be further from the truth. I've done no polling in St. Vincent and the Grenadines for quite some time. I think the last time I would have polled St. Vincent and the Grenadines would have been the last election, and it would have been many months before the last election. And the poll results were consistent with the outcome. So to suggest that Cadmus has been in the field and has produced results like that is entirely untrue. So we haven't been in the field, and that rumors to that are certainly not. I understand that there are other pollsters around, probably with less verifiable accuracy than Cadres, but I don't imagine it was one of them. But I'm always fascinated in the Caribbean how the rumor mill often generates information, and based on comments and whatnot. So no, nothing could be further from the truth. So take Cadres out of that component altogether.
Well, I don't know if you care to give a comment on why is it that people would do those things, and in particular attach your name to that.
I mean, there was a time that I actually got concerned and annoyed about it, and I guess now I see it as some sort of an honor that people seem to feel that all you need to do is to attach the Wickham or the Cadres name to a rumor, and it gives it legs. So I guess in a sense it means that people have some amount of respect for my opinion. But it's also quite silly because in the final analysis, it's one of the easiest things to dispel, because you pick up the telephone or call me, or on social media sometimes I make a posting and it's painfully obvious that that's not the case. So this is something that happens a lot in the Caribbean. I find that organizations that may not be affiliated with Cadres find it easier to spread a rumor, and as opposed to actually doing research to determine what the correct reading is, and to put out verifiable truths. And I think that that's really what it comes down to. There's a feeling that polling can create a reality, which is entirely untrue. We tell a story of what's likely to happen, but there are people that feel that you can sometimes tell a story and make it happen because you repeat it so frequently. And I guess that's the reason why people will spread rumors and attach, the name of Cadres or the name of Wickham to something in the hope that it can make it a reality. So that's probably the easiest way that I can frame that conversation. But the specificity of the number that has been given was frightening. And that's obviously something that somebody's thinking about, that they want to be able to make real.
For persons who don't know and who are listening, Cadres is the name of your company, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Right. So
yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, no, the company is called Caribbean Development Research Services, or Cadres. It's a company that's incorporated in Barbados. The two directors are myself and a gentleman called Corey Sandiford. We have worked in St. Vincent and the Grenadines almost continuously since the 1990s. And actually, St. Vincent was the first place outside of Barbados that Cadres polled when I took over. Prior to me, there was a gentleman called Patrick Emmanuel, who was a Grenadian, and he was the director of Cadres. He passed away, and he passed the baton to me. He passed away in 95, and I took over in 98. And that's the history of the company. But we have done work up and down the region, from Jamaica right down to Suriname, and including St. Martin and all of the others in between, and a few of the Dutch countries as well, for the last 2 decades. And that's basically that's how the name Cadres has been built. One of the things that is not often understood is that Cadres is retained by every and anyone, and in many instances, polling that we do is not published. Often it's confidential, with good reason. If you have time today, maybe we can discuss some of the reasons. So in situations where we may do polling in St. Vincent and the public may not be aware because the information is not made public, as is people's right. What is unfortunate in the Caribbean is that we don't have public polling. Because in Barbados, in Trinidad, and in Jamaica, newspapers have commissioned polls for the purpose of publishing them. That does not happen in the OECS and Barbados, sadly. And unfortunately, it means that the polling is available when it's in someone's interest to publish it. Having said all of that, though, I can tell you on this occasion, I definitely haven't done anything. But there are some times when you do stuff and invariably you have to respond with a no comment. This time around, I can tell you there's nothing to comment on because that's the case. Yeah.
Pigeon, you want to?
When was the last time a poll was conducted related to St. Vincent and Grenadines by cadres?
Yeah, it would have been before the last election. Several months before the last election, I think it was like around February or March of the year in which the election was held. We would have done a round of polling, and it showed, as I said, it was consistent with the outcome. These days, we don't do polling in all constituencies because the reality is that some constituencies are predictable. We don't do polling there. Sometimes it's an interest in knowing what will happen in some places and others. The Grenadines is a place where we don't do polling in Grenadines all the time because in many instances, there's no interest in knowing the political outcome in Grenadines is almost predictable. Similarly, Dr. Gonzalez's constituency, we also don't do a whole lot there either because that's also predictable. Having said that, CADIS has done a bit of polling in St. Vincent and the Grenadines recently that is entirely unrelated to politics. And I mean, we should always make sure the two are separated. So we did vaccine hesitancy surveys for a UN organization. And I think we did some work for another UN organization, UNICEF, in relation to education, corporal punishment, and child sex abuse. That would have been the most recent survey that we conducted in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And I think the child sex abuse and corporal punishment one was done in the summer. So when I say we haven't polled, I meant politically. But certainly we've been in the field doing stuff for UNICEF and also for other UN agencies that have been interested in vaccine hesitancy in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But that's a vintage stuff. The interesting thing is that the stuff for UNICEF is published. You can go to UNICEF's Eastern Caribbean website and you can see the results for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, essentially showing the prevalence of corporal punishment, the extent to which parents want to continue to flog their children, support for the abolition of corporal punishment, and also child sex abuse. And I think the one in St. Vincent, we actually did child sex abuse. We looked at grooming and stalking, which were relatively new phenomena. But that information is in the public domain. If anyone is interested, it's a CADRIS survey, but not a political survey. And it speaks to the situation in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And that one government has nothing to do with, or opposition. That's, as I said, purely UNICEF.
And you said that one is in the public domain, you said,
yeah.
Peter? Where can it be?
It's published on their website. So you just go to UNICEF Eastern Caribbean and you will see the summary results there. I think that we produced a sub-summary for St. Vincent, but you will also see the broader regional survey, which would have done St. Vincent, Barbados, St. Kitts, Antigua, Dominica, and St. Lucia, all of them. And this would have been the third time that we have done this exercise. So you can see how things have changed over time and so on. It's interesting stuff. Unfortunately, it doesn't carry the excitement that politics carries, but it's interesting. And as I said, it's all there, and it can be spoken to if people feel an interest in looking at it. They can go download it.
You have been doing polling since in the 90s, and we are now in the 21st century. How do you compare the situation then with now, especially in the context of the widespread use of social media?
Well, we do it differently now. When we started out, we actually had clipboards in the field, and we had interviewers doing clipboards and stuff. We would collect that information. We would do a data entry, and invariably, I would travel to St. Vincent and the Grenadines several times to drop the data, collect, and supervise, and so on. No, we don't do that at all. Our process is entirely electronic. We don't use social media facilities for collecting data, but we do use a cloud to upload results. And the information is almost instantaneous. And the good part about that is that we have greater oversight because we can tell when interviews are being conducted, where they are being conducted, how long they take. We can communicate with our teams in the field, in real time. So that would be the major difference. We don't do social media monitoring That's done by a lot of advertising agencies. Cadres has never done that, but we do focus groups. That's something that has become a lot more popular of late, where we do focus groups. The challenge with social media that I am always aware and wary of is that, generally speaking, in voting behavior in St. Vincent, women are more likely to vote than men. The other point is that younger people, their voting behavior is more volatile. Older people, their voting behavior is more consistent. And then you will also find that because older people live in the slightly less urban areas, you will find that the rural areas have a greater consistency to a similar voting pattern across the board, while in the urbanized areas, there's a difference. St. Vincent and the Grenadines has been going through some interesting changes where one could argue that your urban corridor is becoming larger, and as a result, you will find that elections are becoming tighter in many instances because the reliable rural vote is becoming smaller and smaller. So those are some of the dynamics that we have noticed. And as I said, women tend to be more reliable in terms of voting than men. The challenge with social media is that it is heavily dominated by young people. It is also heavily dominated by people who have a story that they want to tell. So you often find in a place like Dominica, for example, and I want to use Dominica as the example over St. Vincent. Dominica's opposition is extremely weak. It has one of the weakest oppositions in the entire Caribbean, currently not represented in Parliament at all. But its opposition has a very loud social media presence. And what will happen is that you find that social media facilities are dominated by, for example, Instagram, where you have one person that has 5 characters or 5 different personalities, and they're commenting and arguing with each other and creating a buzz online. It is extremely easy to create a social media buzz that is not reflected in reality. And I found in many instances that, you hear a lot of social media excitement behind a particular young candidate, for example, and then the election comes and, there's nothing there. So I always want people to be careful with social media as an indicator of public opinion, because I've often found it to be a very poor indicator. It's easy to manipulate, and it tends to be dominated by young people, and young people, generally speaking, are less inclined to vote in elections. So I would be a bit wary of the social media thing, because it can't be used as a proxy for what's likely to happen in terms of electoral outcomes.
Is AI presenting any kind of challenges?
Not for me. I mean, as an analyst, I would say, because as an analyst, I get pulled into conversations that have nothing to do with polling, where people are saying, well, I've heard this and I've heard that, like this one where, I've heard of a poll. And you have to have conversations about that in an environment where you're normally dealing with hard data. I don't know that it's so much of a challenge, but it is a reality that presents itself over and over again. And I think that in the Caribbean, we like social media conversations because they're easy to have. So we prefer that than to say, let's have a hard data conversation. So if you look at the UNICEF thing I just spoke about, which is dealing with an important issue, child sex abuse is important. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I've been concerned personally that over the years, St. Vincent and the Grenadines has had one of the higher levels of child sex abuse, and certainly domestic violence levels in St. Vincent and the Grenadines were higher. That was the case in many of the other islands. I found that, we've done reports, that information is presented, and I have never really been encouraged to engage in conversations on hard data. But the number of times that, we've had conversations in St. Vincent and the Grenadines about, Instagram rumors and Facebook stories and stuff like that is fascinating. So I think that the challenge is that people seem to like that stuff, but we are less inclined towards serious conversations about hard data, and that's a Caribbean peculiarity. It's not just St. Vincent. Across the Caribbean, we seem to have these challenges. But in terms of predicting the outcome of an election, I personally would always go back to the polling, the focus groups, the scientific assessment, and for me that is far easier to deal with. But what I have noticed recently is the tightening of margins, where there's a fluidity, and that's something which one has to be aware of. That you can't assume a consistency in the way that you could before. That has definitely changed. That has definitely changed in the Caribbean.
How about the cost of producing a poll? And is there a tendency to cut corners if necessary?
Not for me. It's expensive, and that's probably why you don't get more of it. It's an expensive process, which has nothing to do with the fact that that I'm paid well. That's not the reason. It's expensive because if you imagine conducting 1,000 interviews, and if you imagine paying interviewers to conduct 1,000 interviews, that gives you an idea of the average cost of a poll. And you have to lock in before you even start to look at profit margins. You have to lock in the cost of transporting pollsters around St. Vincent and the Grenadines, transporting them into the Grenadines, which is expensive in and of itself, and then paying them for their time, for each interview that they conduct, and paying them for their time. If you don't pay interviewers properly, you will get a bad product. If you pay interviewers properly, the product becomes expensive. And that is one of the huge challenges that we have with polling, where it's costly, and as a result, there's less of it than I would like. In places like America, polling is no cheaper, but you have polling, for example, in the US election, you have polling nightly. And the reason that you do that is because you have a population of 300 million, where you have advertisers that have an interest in paying for this data, and you can offset the cost in that way. So CNN has an advertising budget that more than compensates them for the few $1,000s that they would spend on polling. In the Caribbean, we don't have that market size. So a person who may sponsor a poll for a newspaper is not going to be in a position to pay the kind of money it would make to make it possible in other instances. And that's why in Trinidad and Jamaica, we still have newspaper commission polling, because they have a market size where they can say, look, you have a newspaper that is selling, let's say 60 or 70,000 copies. And, you can offset the cost of a poll against that. In the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, if you have a newspaper and you sell 10,000 copies, it's plenty. And the question is, is that going to be enough to pay for a poll? I very much doubt it. And it's a reality you have to face. In Barbados, the Nation newspaper had a policy where whenever there was elections, they would see polling as a loss leader. So they would say, we have elections coming up, we're going to lose, let's say $50,000, and we're going to put that into polling. And we will then deal with, the benefit that we get in terms of exposure, reputation, and we will look to make back that money over the 5 years. But even them have stopped, because they have found that the bottom line is not, newspapers are not selling anymore. People are getting the information online. So there's a less interest in it. So as a result, the people that are doing polling invariably are political parties that have an interest in knowing what they need to do differently or what they need to do right. And in most instances, they're not going to publish the results of their polling because it's their information and they prefer to keep it private.
And the practice I've heard about the polling results reflect the position of the commissioner.
Yeah.
Is there any truth to that kind of
Yeah, the phrase that I've often heard is, he who pays the piper calls the tune.
Yeah.
Look, I've often heard that said, and I would always say to people that if I were to give a client what they want, I would probably be better off in the short term, but I would not have been around for 25 years. And a big part of the reason why I've been around for 25 years is that I've had some very uncomfortable conversations with clients in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and elsewhere in the region, because I've told them the truth. And I can think of one in particular in Trinidad and Tobago that I had a very heated conversation and exchange with regarding poll data, which the client said to me, but this cannot possibly be right. because it's not what I'm hearing on the ground. And I adhere to my position that it was very much a reality that I found in my data, and that what you were hearing on the ground was incorrect. And the result of the election bore me out in a very clear and decisive way. I think that was the most stark example, but there have been so many other instances in which you present a poll and you have a conversation with the client. My position and our position at Cadres is very simple. You pay for a poll, you don't pay for a result. So if you come to me and you say, I want a poll done, but I want it to say X, my advice to you is that I would usually identify someone else that can do that for you. I have the name of 2 pollsters in the Caribbean who do that type of thing. And I would usually give, their contact information to that person, because I'm saying if that's what you want, it doesn't make sense sending anybody into the field and wasting time and whatnot collecting data and then having to decide that you want to reflect something different. So I have the name of 2 pollsters. I'm not going to be rude and crass and give that information on the air, but I've supplied that information to people on several occasions and say, look, contact them. You pay them some money, they will give you the result and they will put their name to it, and that's that. And I don't get involved in those kinds of conversations, but my clients know me and they know that if I give them a result, it is what I'm seeing. If I stand behind it, it is of course what I'm seeing. And what people don't ever see is the large quantity of polling that is done that never makes the public press. Which is a result of the conversations that I have in a back room with someone, and the information just stays on my computer. And I could probably pull up 5 or 10 that I would have done in the last 5 years, which have never been published, but reflected a reality that the client disagreed with vehemently. So when I hear this nonsense about, he who pays the piper calls the tune, I think to myself, a pollster that does that is a pretty stupid pollster. And I would like to think myself not to be stupid, but the 2 people that I refer my clients to, they don't really have concerns about, anything beyond the short term with the check. That's the way it works for them, but not for me. What you will find sometimes is that you will have the publication of a poll, and the information does change over time, and that's something which I think is a reflection of reality, because in most instances you do a poll, it shows a result, and you take action based on that poll, and you're able to change the outcome. And when that happens, I think that's great. And I've seen instances in which people say, yeah, but we did a poll, a month ago, and it showed this was happening. And what happened? Something else different happened. And I'm saying, well, clearly, there has been action taken on it, and the action has resulted in that outcome. And that's the nature of this business.
Are there particular model or models that you use that could be described?
When you say models, I'm not sure. Our process is face to face. I always tell people that polling is like having a ladle of soup to determine what the whole pot is made up of.
Okay.
And you take a ladle or a spoon and you taste the soup, and you will automatically know what kind of soup it is. Now, I don't know how Vincey's, if you guys use cow heel soup. I don't know. Cow heel soup is popular in Barbados. I don't know what your preference is in terms of soup in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I mean, what's the preference there?
and the approach taken to identifying and approaching.
Right. So, and I'm saying that the model then becomes the way in which the ladle is drawn. That's ultimately the analogy that I was trying to make in a slightly more humorous way. I usually go by polling divisions, and I try to identify polling divisions that are less likely to be one thing or the other. So I study the history of a polling division, and if it has had a historic loyalty to one party or other, usually I will look for the one that is least inclined to be voting in that way. So the one that's most neutral. That is the polling division that I would normally make my sample in. and you would get either 12, 24, 48, or 60 respondents. And the idea is that you want a sampling that is a division of 12, because 12 is divisible by both 2 and 3 simultaneously. So that's how it's done. And the reason that we go 2 and 3 is because you have 2 genders, male and female, or 2 sexes, male and female, and you have 3 age groups that we use. So the 18 to 30, 31 to 50, 50 and over. And those are the 3 broad age groups that we use. We would break our sample down into those characteristics, and we would select people that reflect those characteristics from those polling divisions that we have identified. We never interview more than 1 person in a house, because that is a waste of time. And usually you try to get houses separated so that you get a feel of people across that region. And you would want to have ideally 2 people in each of the age groups that you've identified in every 12 that you have chosen. And that's basically the model that we use, and it's the model that was given to me by Emmanuel, and it's the model that I have continued to follow even to today.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been following the stone poll in Jamaica, which was quite popular? And are there any similarities to the way you approach your polling?
The thing about it is that I don't know how the Stone Polling Company was taken over by Ian Boxall, and I'm not sure how Ian approaches the model that he uses. So I don't know what changes that he would have made.
Yeah.
But ultimately, Carl Stone's original approach would have been similar to mine. The advantage that Carl Stone would have had in Jamaica, though, is that you have large polling divisions in Jamaica, and you must have at least 3 or 4 dozen PDs in every constituency that you can choose from. In our case, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you would probably have 4 PDs in a constituency, and 5 in some instances. So you don't really have a lot of PDs to choose from. So in his case, he can choose several polling divisions and choose the best that has all the characteristics, and he can deploy his resources there. One of the challenges that we have in the OECS is this issue of oversampling. And some time ago, Boxall did some polling in Barbados, and there was a huge oversample, and the results came out completely skewed, because ultimately the biases that you reflect in one person are being multiplied because you've essentially interviewed too many people. That was the 2008 poll that was done using the Carl Stone model in Barbados. He's never done any polling in Barbados since then, but that one had a huge design bias problem. Not deliberately, it's just that, it's meant to operate in a larger environment. So I hear a lot about the Stone poll, which I do have respect for, but one of the challenges of the OECS region, and this is the reason why the Pat Emmanuel model was really better, was because Pat was the first person that polled Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Dominica, Barbados. Small territories with a different kind of reality than what would have been the case in Jamaica. It's not well known, but the Stone poll was done in Jamaica, and Stone never polled outside of Jamaica. So, it was what people knew, and people felt that was the model of choice because that was where it worked. But there's really not a lot of experience with Stone outside of Jamaica. While in the case of CADRIS, we have polled every single OECS country several times. And, we have a tremendous amount of experience. And I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet, but I'm saying we have a tremendous amount of experience in the Caribbean and in the OECS region. And it's a very, very different environment, because one of our huge problems is this whole question of oversampling. You go to a place like Montserrat, for example, or even Barbuda, where the voting population in Barbuda is 1,800 people. You can't possibly go to Barbuda and deploy in the same way that you would have deployed in Kingston 10, for example. And that's a reality that we have had to come to grips with on more than one occasion.
Peter, somebody's asking, but I think you've answered the question already, but somebody's asking whether or not you can publish a poll without the permission of the client.
Yeah.
I think But
Yeah,
come
we can. We can. Actually, one of the things that we always, when we do our prepare our bids, is that we always say that the results are the property of the client, which is. There was an instant in which I did a poll in Belize, and the poll was commissioned by Parliament. And I was instructed to prepare 2 copies of it independently to be given to government and opposition because it was being paid for by state funds. It was a political poll meant to determine what was going to happen politically. But both government and opposition got copies of it because it was paid for by the state. It was a fascinating model. And both parties could have published it if they wanted to, but I couldn't. And I have never seen a situation like that in any other Caribbean country, and it hasn't happened since. But I thought that was fascinating, that you could have a political system where the level of trust was so high that Parliament would say, well, let's commission a poll, and we both look at the results and see how it flies. If only it could be like that in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Recently, sometime this year, an online publication published a series of what they consider to be results of polls. I don't remember the name. Pijan, do you remember the name?
I remember it, yeah.
You do?
I know the principal,
Okay.
a guy called Deveron Bruce, who actually worked for Cadres for a while.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know what he's up to now, but there's I think Governance Institute or something of this sort. And he did a poll that he found some interesting results. I have a copy of the results. Suffice to say, I wasn't happy with it. The online thing is problematic, and I would prefer not to have done it in that way. But he must have had his reasons and methodology. Invariably, when people do online polling, it's a question of the budget available to them, because online polling is cheap. And the feeling is that if you can get what you call a quick and dirty reading, sometimes a client will say, well, look, let's just do an online poll. Let's give me some information and I will work with that because I really don't have the big money to pay for something major. I suspect that's what happened in that instance, but invariably online polling is like social media. It can easily be polluted by people that want to generate a particular result. And I noticed in that particular poll, the more useful candidate seemed to do better, which is entirely unsurprising because that's what you will find with a online type of activity. But yeah, Cadres had nothing to do with that.
Okay. Peter, there was one last year sometime, not to do necessarily to do with a political issue, but there was one to deal with leadership. Basically leadership. Are you familiar with that one?
That's the one I was talking about. Yeah.
Oh, no, since that was last year. Only this year, there was a series of results published by an online publication. I don't think the publication itself did not conduct the poll, what they consider to be a poll. It was an entity. I don't even remember the name of the entity. Somebody who's listening might share it with us, and I can mention it to you. But yes, there was a series of there was a series of results published by this online publication. It about 2 or 3 months ago, actually.
Okay. This is probably a different one then, because I was talking about the one on leadership a year ago.
Oh, yes. It is called, somebody just shared it with us. It's called Sentinel. That's the outfit. Are you familiar with them?
I'm not familiar with them, no, but I saw reference to Sentinel and so in St. Vincent. It's true. Now you mention it, I've seen reference to it, but I don't know anything about the entity.
Yes. All right. And
I mean, you can do online. For example, of the facility that you're using, the stream that you're using.
Yes.
You can have a facility that allows for polling within that context, and you can do, or Zoom, you can do a poll. So you can have a poll of online callers who would say, based on what I've heard in the program, I think Cecil Ryan is the most popular moderator. And very often when you see these online polling, that's exactly what it is. It's a group of readers, and you say to them, can you give a comment? or can you rate a person? And I mean, the information is publishable because it is ultimately the result of a legitimate poll. The challenge is that it is not a scientific poll. And that's the problem. You don't often get that disclaimer that a lot of this online polling is entirely unscientific.
Right. Okay. I was a pigeon.
So what makes a poll scientific as opposed to non-scientific?
There's one key factor, and that is that every person in your population has to have an equal opportunity of being chosen. That is the golden rule that methodologists would always say you have to observe. If everyone in your population that you're polling, whether that be a school population, a country population, if everyone has an equal opportunity of being chosen, then your poll is scientific. In situations where you manipulate the likelihood that someone will be chosen by a factor, let's say that the person has a computer, the person is online when you're doing that poll, or the person has an interest in participating, then ultimately you've corrupted the scientific value of it. So recently I was invited to do a survey, and the person sent me an email and said, we would like you to participate in this exercise because we want to get a better understanding of what people in the Caribbean think on the environment. If you agree to participate, we will be entered for a prize draw for $200. And once you get that information, that has violated all the principles, because it's a select group of people who have been emailed it. There are select people who would be interested in responding to something like that. And then you say that you give a prize, and automatically you have created an incentive. So everyone in your population doesn't have an equal opportunity of being chosen. And everyone in your population doesn't have an equal interest in participating. So you invariably have created a problem. We had a client that approached us many years ago and asked us to do something like that for TV viewership. And the cooperation was very, very low because we wrote people online and approached them and asked them to do it. And no one was interested. And they decided to sweeten the pot by saying that we would get, people would get a free month subscription to cable television for participating.
But Peter, I have seen those kind of polls, and I thought that it had something to do with generating interest in an otherwise disinterested population.
Yeah, I mean, you mean it by paying people to do it?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. But if you have to generate interest, then you violate the principle of selection.
Okay.
It's a very popular thing to do. And indeed, there's some people who go even further and say, we won't enter you in a draw, we will pay you directly for participating. But the point is that there's some issues where that works. So let's say, for example, you're doing a focus group. We do focus group and we pay people to participate in a focus group. But when we do that, we can never use information as representative of the entire population, because you automatically know that the fact that the person is doing it for money means that they have an interest in being there. So you're right, it's about generating interest. And there are times when you may want to do that. And there are times when you can't run the risk of doing that. People are interested in voting in an election because they're interested in the outcome. And that's the only interest that is important in terms of political polling. In social polling, there are other factors that you can consider. So when we did the stuff in St. Vincent and the Grenadines on child sex abuse and corporal punishment, you want to get the opinion of the entire population. You don't want to know what people who are perverts think, and invariably that's the kind of result that you generate when you pay people. So that's my thing. I tend not to, we scientific pollsters tend to adhere to this principle that everyone has to have an equal opportunity of being chosen. And that's the best way to get a scientific poll.
Mm-hmm. Pigeon?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask to a young person listening to us now, what can you tell them about the career opportunities in polling? Social research.
Yeah, I would love there to be young people. One of the things that I worry about is the fact that my boss died in his mid-50s, and I was given the opportunity to take over. He died prematurely. I was given the opportunity to take over the company when I was 30. And in the 20-something years I've been running it, I have not found a lot of interest from people in that area. One of your co-hosts, Joel Providence, was a pollster back in the day, and I don't think he's interested in that anymore. The reality is that it's hard. It's very hard work. It can compensate you well, but that is not always the case. And unfortunately, many people find it's not easy. So the University of the West Indies, on none of the three campuses, teaches the area of psephology, which is ultimately political polling, and it's very hard for young people to get into. So if you are interested in polling, invariably what it means is that you usually get a degree in political science, which is what I did. And then you attach yourself to an outfit that does it, and you try to learn the craft. Salvin Ryan was original pollster along with Carl Stone. Salvin Ryan was at the Institute of Social and Economic Studies in St. Augustine campus in Trinidad. And he essentially honed his skills and had young apprentices, the vast majority of whom have moved on to other things now. I've not been fortunate to have a young apprentice that has the level of interest in polling that I do. But I think it would be great if, a young Vincentian that's out there, you're at university, you're doing political science. Some of them do sociology and specialize in research methods so that, a lot of this work can be done. But you would need to have a background in statistics. That's ideal. I'm not very strong in statistics, but I've found that the computers can more than compensate for that in this day. You will need to have a background in either politics or sociology because it's about human behavior. But there's a very fertile environment, I think, and a need for more Caribbean people to be interested in studying public opinion research and the behavioral approach to political science. Your Prime Minister, Ralph Gonzalez, was one of the foremost political scientists at UWI in his time. His area was more ideology, philosophy, and that type of thing. And unfortunately, most people who do politics tend to drift into that, and they tend not to drift into the area that I've drifted into. And interestingly enough, I've drifted into that area along the time I was pushed out of academia. And I often think that if I wasn't pushed out of academia, I probably would not have developed the kind of interest in polling that I did. So I do hope that there's young people out there that are interested. If anyone is interested, they can give me a call. I'd be more than happy to help them develop the skills and so on in this area. Because there's a need in the Caribbean for more of it, I think. More people who have an interest and a skill in developing it and taking it in places that I haven't even been able to take it. I watch with interest when you have an election in the US and you have all these posters coming out with competing results and using methods and predictions that I'm impressed by. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Peter, before you go on, I want to open up the line now for persons who wish to engage. Peter, the number to call is 457-9997. You can use the same number if you're going to send a WhatsApp message or if you're going to call WhatsApp. So the line is open if you have any question for Peter or any comment you wish to make on the program so far. Yes, Peter, you okay. Yeah, Peter, are you going to be busy for the rest of this year?
Oh yeah. This is likely to be one of the busiest years ever because we're going to have 8 elections in the Caribbean this year.
Peter, sorry to continue, but we have a call. Let's take the call. Good afternoon or good morning. I think it's still morning.
Hi, Cecil. Good
morning.
Yes,
good morning.
Yeah.
Lansford,
morning.
Greetings.
Good morning, Lansford.
I was asking to ask Cecil, what was the price of the shares when they were issued? You may not be able to give you the current value, but
I don't, to be honest, to be honest, I don't remember.
Idea. I know what you were trying to get at, Philbert.
Yes.
But that would have given you an idea.
Yeah, I have to check it out. I don't remember at the time they were issued. Yes.
Good morning, Mr. Wickham.
Morning.
You've been having quite an interest in discussion. I truly enjoying it. I can concur with all of what you have said. I went to the University of West Indies in Mona in the very late 80s, early 90s.
Early 90s.
And I did a bachelor's degree in business economic and social statistics.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember attending Christine Cummings' tutorial. And at the first tutorial, she was asking the 12, 14 of us in the class, what would you like to do after you leave? And I said, then, I would like to become the Carl Stone of the Eastern Caribbean, but you did it, Dr. Wickham, and I salute you because what you're doing, as you said, given the market in the Eastern Caribbean, it is quite small. And so these are very expensive. I said that right here last week. Collecting data is very expensive. And so the point that you make in terms of an entity having to weigh the benefit versus the cost is always something that must be taken into consideration. And very often entities would go the side of not collecting the data because sometimes they can't see the value. I want to, you said it, but I want to reiterate the point as well. Surveys are important for what the data is used for. I often say to Cecil that the 2016 elections in Jamaica, when the JLP won that election, data collection played a critical role in the outcome of that election. Because up to months, maybe weeks before the election, the PNP was leading based on the polling results that were in the public. But the JLP engaged a pollster, someone out of Trinidad, I'm always unable to remember the name. And he did a series of polls that the JLP used to formulate their pitch to the electorate, their policy formulation. And Mr. Wickham, I don't know if you remember that when they came up with that 1.5, the tax, setting the tax threshold at $1.5 million. And the wording, the way that was put to the people, a lot of persons who were not even making $1 million per year bought into it as though workers were going to get $1.5 million. And the national result, I think, shifted rapidly. The JLP came out winners of the election. And that's the story that was told.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I am appreciating your call a lot. You have a background in economics, and you know, I like the fact that you said you were interested in becoming the Carl Stone of the Caribbean, but you realized that there were far more prosperous routes that you could travel. That's a reality that I think is important that you put that on the table, and I'm happy that you said that you had to be willing to be poor sometimes to be able to do this. I often point out to people that a big part of the reason that I've been able to abide as long as I have is because I don't have children. And I think that for people who have children to support, you often feel the need to have a slightly more reliable source of income in that way. But that's an aside. You're right in terms of Jamaica, and I was also advised that a big part of the reason that the JLP policy program was presented in the way it was because Poland suggested that that's what they should do. And I've had similar experiences in other parts of the Caribbean. You look at the question of focus on issues. We had a recent election in Barbados in one of the constituencies where some intensive polling was done in the run-up to the election. It identified 3 critical issues, which were crime, the cost of living, the condition of roads to a less extent, but crime and the cost of living were number 1 and 2, which are national issues. The important thing, however, is that there was not an assumption that by focusing on those issues that you could sink the government, the Motley administration, because the polling also suggested that people felt, in addition to having those issues as number 1, that the Motley administration had a better opportunity of fixing those issues than the other administration. And it's for that reason that polling is useful in terms of telling one side or the other what they ought to do. So certainly both sides focused on those issues, but one of them was able to focus on it in a way where they were essentially, people said, well, we believe that you can deal with it, while the other ones, we don't believe that you can deal with it. But I mean, I could tell this story over and over again in relation to islands where you're going, and there's a particular formulation that you are able to present that changes people's idea on things. If you look at the Biden scenario, a big part of the reason why Biden gave up when he did was that in the aftermath of his disastrous performance in the debate, the polling was compelling in saying that, look, this wasn't going to happen and they needed to change. And ultimately, he listened to the pollsters and said it would change. It was probably too late. But certainly, it's very useful in terms of telling a government what you can do. It doesn't always work, but it is a good opportunity to be able to go in that direction. So it's useful. I also remember Christine, interestingly enough, because you said that she was your tutor back in the 90s. I remember her when she became a lecturer at the University of West Indies, thinking sociology. I had some brief interaction in the late 90s when I was knocking around postgraduate work at St. Augustine campus. So I do have a recollection of her. And one could argue that these were really the one could say the originators of this kind of work in the Caribbean. Sadly, we've done too little of it in the time. There was one developmental poll that I did in St. Vincent that I've often wished could have been published, and that was one that was done in the wake of the referendum that you guys had. No polling was done before the referendum, but immediately following the referendum, we did a poll that basically concluded that a big part of the reason why the referendum failed was because a lot of people saw it as an opportunity to vote against the government. And it wasn't that the issues were not compelling. Most people didn't know what the issues were, had no interest in the issues, but they just wanted to vote against it. They thought it was a unique opportunity to do so. And therein lies the challenge. I have been able to reference that poll and use it in terms of the scenario in Grenada and Antigua that presented themselves subsequently. So going into those two scenarios, I had the benefit of the St. Vincent information and an understanding that you can talk until you're blue in the face about Caribbean Court of Justice and Republic and all of these issues. When people come to a referendum, they're saying, I vote in. If I vote in, is an election. And if I am Labour, I vote in Labour. If I am national, I vote in national. And that's all it comes down to. And people tend not to be able to say, well, look, I like the idea of a CCJ. So even though I'm NDP, I'm going to vote for it. They felt that these issues on the table were put by a Labour government. And the only thing that you could do if you don't support a Labour government is to vote against them. And many Labour supporters were not interested enough in what they saw as a non-competitive event that they didn't fully understand to vote. So many of them just stayed home. They said they can't be bothered.
Yeah, but before I go quickly, Peter, I would like to ask two quick questions. One that you can comment on. You said that, you gave the definition for a scientific poll, and it's based on sampling that you're able to provide each unit the same opportunity to be selected. Mm-hmm. But you also said that you leave out or you tend to select polling divisions
Mhm.
that are the
More
results
sensitive.
are not so easily predicted based on certain features. How does that affect the sampling? That's
Yeah.
one. And two, I know you're post and you deal a lot with surveys, but I would like if you can comment at least briefly on the use of survey and census data where you collect primary statistics, primary data, as against where you use administrative data. And what's your take on those two forms of gathering data? And,
No,
and
Before you go, Peter, before you answer, and before you go, Lansford, someone has has offered has the answer to the question you asked, the offering share, the initial share offer. It's $8. It's $8. It was $8.64 per share. $8
then you
and
get your answer, you see the return. And this is just 1 year, Pigeon.
Yes.
This is just 1 year. The return you're getting based on your investment. So Phil probably doesn't make back his money.
Me? No, not yet. Yes, Lansford. All right, Lansford, thanks a lot for contributing to
Thank
this
you guys for having me. Thanks,
All right,
Peter.
then.
I listen out there.
Good. All right, then. Good.
no,
Sorry, Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I also want to thank him for raising the question. You can tell he's an economist.
Yes.
The first point that he made is an important one because on the one hand, I said everyone has to have an equal opportunity of being chosen. But in the same response, I also said that I deselect polling divisions that are more inclined to vote historically because I'm interested in seeing change. So technically speaking, I set up a principle and I violate it in the same response because I agree that once you take out polling divisions, you automatically have taken out an opportunity of those persons that are being selected. And it's interesting that as an economist, he has raised that because that was one of the main things I was challenged on by Wendell McLean, who was also an economist and someone who had a huge influence on my method over time. Even though he wasn't a pollster, he was someone who was critical of the method, and I was able to learn from his criticisms. And that was the point that he was making. So look, Wendell said a better approach would be to take the entire country, have all of the voters listed from A to Z, have a selection method for every nth person, and interview that person and ask them their opinion. And that way you get your 1,000 and everyone has a genuine opportunity of being chosen. That was what he was saying to me would have been better than what I was doing, which was like pre-selecting particular polling divisions. The real reason that I haven't been able to do that is because, well, to start with, that's what Pat Emanuel and Turkey Carlstone would have done, and that's the method that I took. But the point is that from a management perspective, it's easier to manage our method where you actually go on the ground and select people in houses as opposed to taking names, which is what the Americans do, where they have telephone numbers and they just have them and they can run a program and call them directly. My experience has been that when you approach a person whose identity that you know and you ask them political questions, they're less likely to give you a good response. And then the question is always, if you find that person's name on a voters list, then you have to actually find the person in practice, which becomes harder. So while I agree with you that I do violate the principle, I would argue that scientifically the violation is in the interest of greater accuracy. So what I can say is that everyone who exists within marginal polling divisions that has an influence on the outcome of an election has an equal opportunity of being chosen. And in this instance, the population I'm interested in are not people who vote faithfully one way or the other because I know how they will vote. The population I'm interested in is people who vote marginally because those are the ones that are going to influence change. And that's the reason why polling is more sensitive. The other thing with the Cadres poll is that invariably it tends to favor the opposition more than the government, or alternatively, it tends to favor the change agent more than the person who is the incumbent. And that has always been a bias that's reflected in many ways because of the fact that we go into these sensitive areas and we don't often balance them by going into the heavy areas. So in a place like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, if we don't poll heavily in Dr. Gonzalez's constituency, but we poll more heavily in the sensitive ones, then you're going to see more of that indication for change in the swing, which in my opinion is not a bad thing, because it means that if you're erring on the side of well, the alternative, not the incumbent, and you know, the best scenario, well, depending on who you're looking at it from or whose benefit it is, you may be able to indicate that change is more likely than it really is. And I don't mind, as opposed to, you know, erring on that side if I do make a mistake. So it's a powerful point that he made. If only I had the facility to present both models and say this is one versus the other and do some kind of a scientific analysis of it. But to be honest, this is one of the first few occasions that I've actually been challenged to give that kind of response, and I appreciate it very much. But the first being when Randall McLean raised it with me back in the day and suggested that, you know, he felt that these modifications will be made. And it's because of that that I took the time and I said, well, let me go and look and see whether I can do this listing. And I realized that the management of it was impossible. So as a result, you know, we stuck to this method. And as I said, we would really need to modify the statement by saying everyone within a sensitive polling division has an equal opportunity of being chosen, and that much, you know, we can say. The other point he made about administrative data is a brilliant point as well. I would love to use more administrative data to be able to understand things. The problem is that we don't really get it in the Caribbean. You know, we don't really get administrative data. So for example, in the United States of America, people register as Democrats and register as Republicans. That's publicly available information that you can use to start to frame your conversation on what people are likely to do politically. But we don't get anything like that in the Caribbean. And even the registration data that we have is entirely unreliable. So you have someone who is registered in Central Kingston, right? The person long has moved into North Leeward and they live there, but the registration, you know, suggests that they are supposed to be in Central Kingston. And they vote in Central Kingston because that's probably where the mother lived. So this issue of ancestral voting has been hugely problematic because you have people that are registered in areas that don't live there, but will vote there and they will come back to vote there. The person who is campaigning has no access to them because the person knows that they don't live there. And you can't access them to campaign on their behalf. But every election, they're going to come back reliably and vote, as with their mother, who probably still lives there. And then the other administrative information, which, you know, we don't get a lot of, but I agree with you that that kind of data, if you could weave it into your analysis, unemployment data, employment statistics, you know, those kinds of things would be a brilliant add to the political, because they are good indicators. If you can formulate an index with levels of unemployment and other cost of living increases, the cost of living index, and those kinds of, there's something called a misery index that formulates those sets of information which are available administratively, nothing to do with a poll. You can get a good idea of how well or how badly a government is doing by doing that without having even going to the field period. But sadly, in the Caribbean, we don't have a lot of that, and as a result, not a lot of experience. Sorry, the response was so long-winded, but I was actually quite intrigued by the question.
But Peter, I think specifically what Lansford might have pointing to when he talks about administrative data is that the government here has been using the data from the National Insurance Services to give an indication as to the level of employment or unemployment in the country. And some people criticize that. And so I think that's what Lansford was referring to, the use of data from the National Insurance Services.
Yeah, that is a reasonable criticism which has been made in many of the islands as well, because the presumption is that a person who is on national insurance is unemployed, and that is not necessarily always the case, because a significant section of Vincentians and persons from the Grenadines are not part of that conversation anyhow. And I'm always fascinated that you approach someone that sells coconuts in town and you ask that person if they consider themselves to be employed, and they will say no. In many instances, that may very well be a person who was employed by government and was laid off, or was employed in a hotel and was laid off, decided to take their severance money and go and buy a product and sell, or go to Miami or go to Panama and buy goods to come back and sell out of the back of a car. They will tell you that they're unemployed. They're drawing unemployment benefits, but the person is working. And one of the biggest challenges that we have with these unemployment statistics is that they rely heavily on Social Security data, and the Social Security data doesn't often keep up with the reality of people's employment. People that work as maids and gardeners and that kind of thing, half of them don't register on that system, and in some instances they are working reliably elsewhere, and they were not working reliably elsewhere. They're drawing unemployment benefits, and they're still working. So I get the reason why he's saying that, and he has suspicions, and it can rest assured that his suspicions are reflected in many of the islands where there's a problem with that. Trinidad and Tobago has a ridiculous situation where people are on this unemployment relief program. They call it CPET now, and there's thousands and thousands of them that are paid a salary by government and work elsewhere, and they show up, they take their money, and they go and they work elsewhere. But the moment that those programs, which are seasonal, are discontinued, they consider themselves unemployed. And they were never unemployed before or since, but they consider themselves unemployed. I know what I'm saying makes sense, Cecil.
Well, there's been some disagreement in terms of those. The government, ministers of government, have been using using the NIS data to give an estimate of the level of unemployment or employment in the country, and there have been some disagreement with that. But I think Lansford is calling back. He may wish to clarify. Let me take the call. Hi, Lansford. I know your number, so I see you.
I just say hi. I don't normally do this, but
that's all right. That's fine.
Yes. Peter, the point is, as I was making, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the government got assistance from the World Bank. And based on what was described by the minister, a study was done to assess the labor force and got labor force and labor market information in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So it was not simply using Social Security unemployment numbers. As a matter of fact, we do not pay unemployment benefit in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So we can't use that. The point I was making, or the point I wish to be considered, is that, and you made the point, you can go out and conduct a labor force survey at the household level. And as you said, the thing is, the questionnaire is framed to protect against this, where you ask somebody and they will basically say they're not employed, even though based on the international definition that is used, that the person is employed. So that is one of the drawbacks from surveys, that there's an interviewee bias that is included in the results. Mind you, as I said, a good designed questionnaire would try to reduce that as much as possible. But I don't think it can be eliminated. As against the NIS data, where you have all of the data before you, you have the total number of persons registered. And by law, every employee ought to be registered, because every employee must pay or ought to pay National Insurance Services contribution. So you have a comprehensive set of data before you from the National Insurance Services. And once you design your questions to reflect the variables you're trying to measure, the outcome, the results that you want to get in terms of the labor force. I mean, it will not be exact, but you can get a very good understanding of the labor force, since the law says every employee must be registered. And you can tailor your definitions in the same way it is done when you go out into the field. You look and so forth. And it is my view that you come up with a set of data that is as comparable and, in my opinion, better than what you get out of a household labor force survey. Mm-hmm. So I was not simply asking about taking a simple measure, such as the number of persons receiving unemployment benefit. I was talking about a comprehensive study where you have a statistician sit down, design the study, and so they are able to measure all of the things, even though you're doing it differently, that you would do in a household labor force survey.
Mm. But let me ask you two questions. Do you think that in many instances, the cost of doing something as comprehensive as that becomes prohibitive to the point where you either would do it once every 5 years, or alternatively ask yourself, does it really make sense to do it at all? Because it's so expensive to do that you end up spending more money on the measure than you can spend on the solution. The other point is that regardless of how well designed a product is, an instrument is, and how well trained the investigator is, you're still going to have a challenge where you have a person who works occasionally but perceives himself to be unemployed unless he is working for a government. Because he wants to work for government. He thinks employment means that he is in the public service and he's getting a regular wage. And for the time being, he's doing bits and pieces, and he may very well be earning more from the bits and pieces he's doing, the gardening and the other work. But he still sees himself as unemployed. And you interview that person, and that person is continually going back to their default, that unless I'm working and getting a paycheck regularly, I'm not working. But yet still he is working and contributing to the economy in an important way. No?
I totally agree with you. And I'll answer your two questions, but I'll start with the second one first. And it is for exactly that reason why I said the NIS data ought to be more reliable than the household survey. Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you on that one. And with respect to the cost, you mentioned it earlier in your presentation. Household surveys are very expensive. Mm-hmm. If you take, as you said, 1,000 interviews. When I did surveys nearly 25 years ago, the least you could have paid for an interview was $25. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. If you take 100 respondents, that's $25,000 already upfront. That doesn't take into consideration transportation, processing the data and all of that. Could be very expensive. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's why it is so prohibitive in small countries and small economies like that it is not conducted regularly. And with all of the risk involved in getting good and accurate and clean data at the end, something like what the World Bank did in St. Vincent, where you have 2 or 3 persons, or how many persons, going through the data, and all this data is already computerized. Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of extracting it in the form in which you want your data to be presented, because it's already computerized, and you can get it extracted, I believe, quite easily. And so sometimes I think, well, not sometimes, I think very often, that is a more efficient and economic way of collecting the data. I would still like labor force surveys to be conducted, and they must not be seen as one versus the other, but must be complementary of each other. And as I said previously, you use one to validate the other. as against seeing one as a proxy of the other.
Your points are excellent, and you use a figure that related to when you were doing polling back in the 90s, I believe. You would need to pay people a bit more now, and you
Of course.
understand the challenge that we face. The CDB was doing poverty studies in several of the Caribbean islands, and in one of those islands, the CDB loaned the government $1.2 million to conduct a poverty assessment that determined that there were poor people in the country, which is something that people already knew. My question, I wasn't involved. I was not involved in that exercise. I can speak dispassionately, although I would have been happy to benefit from some of that money, but I didn't. That having spent that quantity of money, do you really need to spend $1 million to determine that there's poverty existing in any Caribbean country? And if you spend $1 million to determine that there is poverty, $1 million, how much money are you going to spend to fix the problem? Because invariably, when you spend that quantity of money to determine that there is a problem, then you have to start with a remedy that is going to be considerably more expensive than that. I would have been happier if the $1.2 million could have been used to provide support at the level of families to households. So during COVID, for example, in Barbados, at one point in time, government spent just over $100,000 providing food hampers for a substantial number of at-risk families in Barbados. Now, people got that didn't need, and that was, in a sense, your oversupply. But I'm saying you're spending 10% of that quantity, less than 10%, because it's Barbados versus US, to actually feed people for a week in a situation where it was critical without doing any research. And the only mistake that you made is that you gave people two, and you gave people who didn't need to get them. But still, the difference in cost, you're looking at over $900,000 difference. And that's the reason why I asked the question about the cost of sometimes doing it and that way. But your point about using existing data in the way that the World Bank did is an interesting one, because you get around the challenging cost of the labor force survey, which are notoriously expensive as well, by saying that maybe we can get around that by doing, using what information we have at our resources to our ability to be able to do that. Fortunately, though, there are institutions like UNICEF has secured funding for the series of these surveys that we would have done in St. Vincent. And they were able to get them done for a lot less, significantly less. And, sometimes that data has been helpful because you can get it on the cheap, so to speak. And, you can still get some sense of what's going on. So that's useful.
Just before I go, Peter, it's interesting you mentioned the World Bank funded poverty study, because that became a very contentious issue in St. Vincent, and it's very often used on the political front. I happen to have gotten some inside information in terms of the conduct of some of the persons who were involved in that study. I didn't get it from any government source. I got it from people who were involved, unsuspecting persons who were simply talking to me, not necessarily to give me information, but talking about their experiences. Mm-hmm. And based on my knowledge, I realized that no, there's no way that data could have been used, because the data was severely compromised with respect to the methodology and even the processing and analyzing of the data. Mm-hmm. And therefore, in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we spent that $1 million plus and didn't have any results to show for it. The government, particularly the Minister of Finance, got a lot of blame for it. But the people who are criticizing the government over it do not have an understanding of what was involved. And that is one of the reasons I asked you, Peter, to speak about using administrative data, secondary data, as against primary data. I am all for primary data, but sometimes it is just too expensive. Mm-hmm. And if you can get the same quality of data using an alternative means, I will always go for it. Again, thank you guys for having me.
Thanks again, Lansford. Your contribution.
And Lansford, let me just very quickly respond and say, I agree with you. I saw the primary questionnaire that was used for the World Bank study. And the thing was like a miniature book. And one of the issues that I have with people that design those is that the World Bank would have had consultants. And I think the consultant for that was a company in Trinidad and Tobago that was retained to do that and that alone in terms of designing it. The design came up with what was an academically perfect design that would have checked all the boxes and answered all the questions, but the human element was missing. And I think that what a lot of the interviewers in St. Vincent struggle with is the fact that you have to walk into someone's house with this book and interview the person for the better part of an hour. And the carrying capacity of the average individual goes after the first 2 pages. And I think that a lot of them, they were well paid to do it, and the interviewers were determined to finish it. But in many instances, the respondents were fed up because you're asking them about all kinds of issues, which may have been important to the researcher. But my concern was that it was not sensitive to the human element. And the one in Barbados that we had was the same problem and that's the reason why we weren't involved, because it was a book that you were basically going into people's houses and attempting to sit down and interview them for an hour. Many of the people were getting frustrated after 20 minutes and saying, I don't want to do this. And the instructions that they had in those situations is to leave and come back. And the problem is that if you frustrate me once, you're going to frustrate me twice, And then in many instances, after you got past the first interview, you had a supervisor that would come in and check the accuracy of the data. So my thing is like, come on, you waste my time for an hour, and then you're going to send someone else to check over that information for another half hour. I'm not interested in doing it. So that's some of the problems, and it was too cumbersome. And my thing is that if you want to assess my level of poverty, you have to be able to do it in less than 10 minutes. If you can't do it in less than 10 minutes, you're wasting my time. And most people are not interested in having their time wasted, and therein lays the challenge. But it was great to talk to you because clearly you're on top of these things, and we need more of these kinds of conversations in the Caribbean, unfortunately, because the reality out there, a lot of people don't understand.
Peter, Lansford was off, eh?
Okay, no problem. But I figured
he's still following, and if he wishes to come back, he's free to come back anytime and interact with you. But in the meantime, there are a few WhatsApp questions and comments. I think this one you may have answered this one before, but let me read it. There, Mr. Wickham, does Mr. Wickham think that that with regards to a political polls, they can negatively impact the outcome of an election? And the person goes on to say, in the months ahead, the results maybe indicate that one side is going to win, and this may be a deterrent to some from actually going out to the polls on the day, because in their view, the outcome is already determined, so their vote may not make a difference. So, but essentially the person wants to know if whether or not the outcome of the poll can affect the outcome of an election in one way or the other.
Yeah, and the simple answer to that question is yes. We have anecdotal evidence of that in the case of the 2013 election in Barbados, where polling was done that showed that the Barbados Labour Party was winning, the Democratic Labour Party won. My own investigations after revealed the fact that there were a number of people that believed that the Democratic Labour Party, Barbados Labour Party, was winning on a landslide, which was not consistent with what the poll was saying. The poll was showing essentially a statistical dead heat. But because within the plus or minus 5%, the Barbados Labour Party was ahead, a lot of people felt that the BLP was winning on a canter. And it demotivated people from voting for the Barbados Labour Party, especially as there were some behaviors on the part of the BLP that manifested themselves that people didn't like. But verifiably, I can go back to the 94 election in the United Kingdom, where they had an extremely low voter turnout. That was the election that Tony Blair won. That would have been his second term. There was an extremely low voter turnout, and there was a British election study, which is based at Essex University, a very comprehensive analysis that they did, where they actually did surveys among non-voters. And most of the young non-voters that spoke to them said the reason that we did not vote was because the polls told us there was going to be a landslide. We had no problem with Tony Blair winning, and as a result, we felt that there was no reason for us to go out and vote. So the person who sent the WhatsApp is correct. People are voting invariably because they're motivated by the desire to see a particular outcome. And in many instances, if they believe that that outcome is happening, they just choose to stay at home. And it's for that reason that since 2013, I have not been publishing many of the polls, especially in situations where a landslide is being predicted. So in the 2018 election, the polls predicted a landslide for Mia Mottley, and those polls were not published. In 2022, the polls predicted a landslide for Mia Mottley, and those polls were not published. In the last election that we had in Barbados, where Charles Blackman was winning and it was a landslide, polls were conducted, and those polls were not published, because in every instance, the feeling is that if you go and you publish that information, it is likely to reveal, people will say, well, look, I had no reason to go and vote because you didn't win. And it's possible that you may believe, like in 2013, that you're going to win, and then you're not win. So the caller is very correct that it is one of the challenges that recently has become problematic. In France, you cannot legally publish a poll within 3 weeks of an election, and that's their law. There are no laws regulating it in the other Caribbean countries, but my clients, generally speaking, have been inclined now not to publish poll data, because invariably they see it as a demotivator for people to vote in one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. So again, the number to call is 457-9997. That's the straight number, or you can send a WhatsApp message and call WhatsApp on that same number, 457-9997. In the meantime, Peter, somebody's asking. Oh, we have a call. Let's go to the call. Greetings, my friend and comrade. How are you doing? Hello, Chris.
Yes, good morning, Cecil.
Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Cecil, John.
Good afternoon, sir.
And guess Peter. Welcome.
Good morning.
Well, yeah. My question to you, Peter, is scientific polling that you have been doing throughout the Caribbean, and since I've heard of cadres, since you've done it, as opposed to now focus group. What is the difference between the two, and in terms of accuracy of data and outcomes based on either method?
Yeah, that's an excellent question that you have raised, and I'm fortunate in that I used to teach research methods at UWI, so I can give you the reality and also the academic. Focus groups are popular now, more popular because they're cheap, and they tend to give information to clients that they may think is attractive and desirable in a far cheaper package. But the science is basically that the poll will always tell you the what, the focus group will tell you the why. So a poll may say, I will vote for the NDP. You ask a person in the poll, will you vote for the NDP? And will you vote, or who will you vote for? And they will tell you, I will vote NDP or I will vote Labour in a poll. You can go into a focus group and ask that person why. And in many instances, the why is interesting, because the person may say, I will vote for the NDP because I believe that I will vote for the NDP because I believe the ULP been in power for too long. That gives the person who supports Labour the opportunity to understand why that person thinks the way that they are thinking. And there may be things that you may be able to do to change that perception. You know, for example, you may say, I may vote for the NDP because I live in the Grenadines, and you know, that's all we've ever done. And again, if you want to change that outcome, you can change it. So the reality is that one is not better than the other. I think that they're complementary tools of research. And in many instances, we are doing both, in that we are asking people what they plan to do, and then we will ask them why they plan to do it, and the information about why is instructive. So recently, focus groups that we have been doing identified, and I can use the same election in St. Peter and Barbados as a good example, because we would have done both. So we said to people, who you will vote for? They said they're voting Labour and they're voting for Chad Blackman, who won by a landslide. When we asked them why, they said, one is that we don't believe that the opposition can win. But more importantly, they're saying the reasons were issues which they felt that the government, like the cost of living and crime, that government would be better able to impact than the opposition. So in the case of St. Vincent, I would say that both methods are important. And the easy solution is to say, look, one is the what and the other one is the why. And the whys are often very important, because you need to understand why people are voting the way they're voting. But the why is always cheaper to understand, because you can take a set of people and you can pull them together and say to them, why are you going to vote the way you're voting? The danger is that many people will take 10 people in a focus group, ask them who they're voting for. Someone may say, the majority of them may say they're voting NDP, and they may come out and say, well, in the focus group that we did, the majority are voting NDP, so the NDP is going to win on a landslide. That's a dangerous point. But if you take them into a room and you ask them why they're voting the way they're voting, then that is really the reason that you should use a focus group. And I would say that you should really do both in many instances. I hope that's answered the question.
Oh,
It's a very excellent question that you've asked.
Yeah, because I don't know. I think in St. Vincent of late, there is that heavily reliance on focus group surveys, and I am not too convinced that it gives the accurate picture on the ground, especially if somebody knows that beforehand who is behind the focus group, and a man who supports the other side will not want to participate because it's a small country. This is not like you deal with a population of 300 million. You deal with a population of 100,000. So a man comes in an area and say, okay, we're going to do a focus group. You start to see persons going in who might be supporting a particular grouping, and then you say, nah, I ain't going with these guys. So you tend to get skewed results from that. And then you extrapolate that out and say, okay, I'm going to win 10 seats, and the other side going to win 5, and I'm going to put Peter Wickham's name on it, and so on. That's how we end up with these problems down in these islands. You know what I'm saying?
No, I remember reading a book that was written by James Carville. This is something that he wrote years ago, and he was talking about some of the focus groups that they did for Bill Clinton when Bill Clinton was running for president the second time. And basically, they did focus groups with people who said they were not voting for Clinton. Then we asked them why. And one of the interesting findings was that a lot of those people said they didn't vote for Clinton because they didn't like Hillary. We're not voting for Bill because we realize there's a package and we don't like Hillary, and Hillary seems to be all up in everything. Bill Clinton responded to that by distancing Hillary from the second term in a way that she was not involved in. She was involved in the first term very heavily. He distanced himself from her at the political level in the second term. Now, that was a simple set of information that was conveyed by focus groups, that people were uncomfortable with that. The other time that focus groups were used fairly effectively was when he had this issue with Monica Lewinsky. And they used focus groups to understand what exactly it was that people had a problem with. And they discovered from those focus groups that people didn't have a difficulty with the infidelity. They had a difficulty with the lying. And that was the basis on which he came and he formulated this whole thing where he apologized to people and said, like, I did have sex with that woman. However, I like to protect the family and whatnot, which is essentially information that came from focus groups. So they used them with devastating effect in the United States. And I remember those two because Carvel spoke about those in his own writing, saying that, we knew that people had issues with things, but we wanted to find out what exactly was the problem with Bill Clinton. And in that case, they found out people were like, was it the problem that he was unfaithful to his wife? People said, no, that was neither here nor there. The challenge is that people didn't think he should lie about it because they felt the lying was a thing. So he apologized to the wife, he apologized to the country for lying, and he went on to win the election.
Yeah, well, he also brought in Dick Morris.
Yeah. He did the polling too, right? Yeah, for sure. He did polling as well. But the two things were complementary. Yeah.
Right. But in a small society like Simmons, especially when you tend to know the people around, a focus group, guys going into a session and so forth. How likely you think that could be impartial or less partisan than it could be? Because I'm telling you, if I see Tom, Dick, or Harry, I know from the other side going into a meeting, I tend not to. I pull myself away, so there's no balance there. So the information that could be skewed.
We've never done focus groups in I don't know if other people have, but we've never done political focus groups in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We've done focus groups dealing with those other issues I talked about, UNICEF, domestic violence, and whatnot. But we've never done focus groups on politics in St. Vincent and the Grenadines for that very reason that I've often found that conversations about politics in St. Vincent are very, very fixed in terms of people's political objective. It doesn't make sense going into the Grenadines asking people about the reasons for their voting. We know why, and that is a reality that is not likely to change. So that's the thing. We've never done it. I don't know whether other people have had more success, but I would be very skeptical of the likelihood that you can get an objective conversation on political issues in some places in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And if it is that you're trying to understand how you can change a voter's mind, I don't know if it is a tool that will be terribly effective, because depending on who you get, you probably will get a person who is supporter of one versus the other, and their information will be colored, in that way. While with other social issues, you get a robust conversation on them. But the politics is a little delicate, and the small size is a factor, because you do see those challenges in other Caribbean islands. One of the things I did in Dominica, for example, was that I used focus groups once to see what people thought about particular candidate options, but they were candidates for the same party, and that worked well because people were able to frankly discuss candidates, but within the context of the same party that they were supporting. The likelihood that you could get people from different political persuasions sitting down together objectively in some of these small islands is quite low.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.
All right.
I appreciate that. Nice.
All right, Chris. Thanks for calling.
Peter, I know there's a systematic way of selecting a sample for survey, for example.
Mm-hmm.
What is the process in selecting a focus group?
It's largely unscientific. It is a question of who you know that is available to you, that is willing to speak to you. So in the case of the last set we did in St. Vincent, we interviewed parents, and we wanted parents of children in a particular age group, and we basically just identified people who we knew that were eligible and willing to speak to us for the money that we were paying. We also did vaccine hesitancy, because vaccine hesitancy was a huge issue in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and we did focus groups on that. And in that instance, the criteria for being involved was the person's unwillingness to take the vaccine. That was one, and we wanted to speak to these people to find out why. And then in other, we found people who were willing to take the vaccine, and we said, okay, what was the reason that you were willing to take it? But focus groups are not really scientific in terms of selecting the people. It's usually just a question of who you can get. And we have recruiters, And recruiters are usually community-minded people who know people in the village, in the district, and so on. That we can say, can you identify for us 10 people that did not take the vaccine? Can you identify 10 people that did? We would have separate discussions with either. The vaccine issue was one that there were very, very direct lines drawn in St. Vincent regarding people who were takers and people who were non-takers. So it was easy to get, and people had very strong views in both regards. So it was easy to pull them together and ask them and say, look, to get them. And I found one non-taker was pretty much representative of, because they had the same reasons why people weren't willing to take. You didn't have to worry too much about getting the wrong respondent.
Peter, this person has three interesting questions. Let me put them to you. My question to Mr. Wickham is, what impact does policies such as citizenship by investment and switching from Taiwan to China could have on the voting population of St. Vincent and Grenadines with regard to the current state of affairs geopolitically? Interesting. Are you gonna respond to that?
Yeah, it's a loaded question, but I can respond. I mean, my response is I really don't know how much difference it's gonna make. Citizenship by investment has become a particularly polarizing issue in St. Vincent and the Grenadines because the government has an avowed policy opposed to it, and the opposition has an avowed policy in support of it. In addition to that, you have several other Caribbean countries in which citizenship by investment is something that's become very popular. And you have places like Grenada where both government and opposition support it. Dr. Gonzalez's position has been standout in the Caribbean regarding his opposition to citizenship by investment. Prime Minister Motley is also opposed to it. In Barbados, neither government or opposition has really been supportive of it, but we have been less vocal, while Dr. Gonzalez has been very vocal in his opposition. I tend to think that those issues are not really going to move the needle because the views of Dr. Gonzalez and the views of the NDP, even under different leadership over time, has been consistently the same. And if it hasn't moved the needle in the last 5 elections, I would be less inclined to think it will move the needle in this one. The other issue that was raised was citizenship by investment, and what else?
There are two other sub-questions. One is that what impact has the EU Court of Justice, the EU Court of Justice ruling on Malta recently on the future of CBI?
Yeah. I don't know the Malta thing. I am not remembering what the court ruled on it, but what I do remember was that when Malta entered the game, it was a game changer to the extent that it meant that there was a product on the market that people could buy that was far more valuable than anything else in the Caribbean that we had, and it blew all of ours out of the water. So my sense is that even before the court ruled in relation to Malta, the fact that it had become a product for which people have an appetite, it makes it less attractive. To me, the win has been knocked out of CBI sales a long time ago. I don't really know that it is a product that is going to make a difference in terms of the outcome of any election. The height of the CBI excitement was the St. Kitts election. I think it was 2010, when essentially Dr. Douglas paid off the national debt from CBI revenues, but in the process, he also destroyed the CBI product to the point where it was like a drive-through. And the consequences were significant and dire for the rest of the Caribbean regarding CBI. So it worked for him financially. However, the implications that we're seeing today with all the concerns of different countries and whatnot have a lot to do with that. So my sense is that there is enough conversation about CBI to suggest that it can be the determining factor in terms of whether this government continues or not. And I'm also a bit surprised that the NDP is still hitching their wagon to the belief that the sanctions will change the government on the basis of CBI's revenue, because CBI revenue is not going to be anything significant anyhow in the future. So even if you get into the game now, that horse has bolted a long time. And what money to be made was made by St. Kitts and Grenada and Antigua and St. Lucia. There's not a lot left in it now, so you're going to be wringing very little out of a product. And I have no particular view one way or the other. I mean, I'm not on one side or the other of the issue. It's just that I really don't know how productive a conversation is going to be for either party now, because people have very clear sides drawn. And the second is that the developmental future in it is not very great. Within the European Union, I know it has been very controversial as well. But when Malta got in, it was essentially a product that was essentially like a gold standard. I don't know if the court is now saying that Malta can't do it any longer. My sense is that what the court would have done is impose controls on what Malta could not do. But in the meantime, Donald Trump is considering a gold card, as he called it, where you can't necessarily buy a passport, but you can get residency if you pay enough money. The United Kingdom also has that. They have a residency program where if you have enough money to invest, you can get residency. And if you live there for long enough, you get the passport anyhow. That's also something that Barbados is considering. And the thing with St. Vincent is that if an investor wants to live in St. Vincent, there's really nothing stopping that person from doing so. Because anyone can buy land in St. Vincent. Half the people who own houses in Musty don't really live there anyhow, but they own the house, they can come and go as they please. The government is not going to stop a person from investing millions of dollars in any kind of investment in St. Vincent. So you can essentially be resident overseas, you can come and go and technically speaking get the benefits of living there. And that's a very different reality now than what existed before. So the conversation to me isn't going to be, I don't think it's going to be a turning point. There was another question that he asked about another aspect of it.
Well, it's a continuation of the same question which you've had, but I'll read it anyway. Just give me a minute. Let me just bring it back up. It says, do you think they should allow the Caribbean to continue business as usual, given that they have closed down all the programs in the EU now? Mm-hmm. That's the question.
But I think for all intents and purposes, the level of due diligence involved is making it virtually impossible to do it anyhow. So my answer to that is that the controls that have been placed on it are such now that there's really not a lot of future in the program. So I don't know. I don't know that it's going to be critical going forward, because it's such a hard thing to do. And I tell you, when Denzel Douglas initially started up this thing, rebranded it, and gave the opportunity to buy citizenship based on a charitable contribution without having to even go to the country, it was a game changer. But the Canadians clamped down on that one time. The Americans are imposing this due diligence. It's hard to do now, honestly. So even without the European position, it's going to be very, very difficult going forward to make any serious money out of it, in my view.
Yeah, this person has a question for you about the length of question. It says, what do you consider the maximum length of time and time of the day for an interview/survey?
I like 10 to 15 minutes. I think that's optimum. I always say to my interviewers that if you have to turn pages in the days that we had paper, you have to turn pages more than twice. You run into challenges. But I would say 10 to 15 minutes in the afternoon when the person is at home. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
It's more challenging because you have a select number of people during the day, which is essentially all people who are not working. But weekends and afternoons are ideal. Between, let's say, after 4 or 5 when the person is home, let's say after 5, and certainly before the person starts to think about dinner and stuff like that. That's the optimum time. And, you hold them for 10 or 15 minutes. Anything longer than that will become challenging. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. So let me just remind persons again, the number to call is 457-9997 if you want to get in to interact with Peter. We have just a few more minutes remaining on the program, and so if you want to send a WhatsApp or call, this is your time to do it. Next 5 minutes would be basically we'd be wrapping up on the program. Peter, is there anything you want to emphasize in terms of polling and the purpose of polling? Well, before you do, there's somebody who wants to get in. Let me just bring in the person. Greetings. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, greetings, Brother Cecil and Brother Pijan, and Brother Joel, wherever you are.
Joel
And,
is not here today.
foremost, Foremost, Mr. Peter Wickham. I'm Bongo Shaka here. Glad to have you this morning. I think you are very balanced and you speak without any favoritism or anything like that. You know, and I like to also thank Mr. Weeks for his invention to broaden the scope of the discussion a little further. Because I know you need more than one program, Brother Peter, to explain a lot of stuff, you know. But you have convinced me that throughout the years, I never took in polls. I think you, knowing and listening you, I think you're the man deal with, you're a non-partial person, you know. You tell it like you did your research and so on. And you have given an example where you see deception because you give a typical case of the Bajan election, okay? And I listen a lot of news, Peter, throughout the world, and you even go to United States. I see a lot of polls where they did manifested wrong in the result, how they had predicted. And in some places in the world, I've seen where some governments will pay to do polls and to be in favor of them. And you know, in the media world today, is who control the media. And you see the big corporate who control the media and government who pay millions of dollars lobbying for this and that. So
Bongo Shaka, I don't want you to go over what Peter has said already. He said them very clearly. And it's no need for you to go over. So I don't know if there's another comment or question you have.
No, I'm just making a comment to seal up because I know your time is limited. So I was just going on seal up. So, so there's a thing, you know, Peter, you have convinced me, and a lot of deception goes around polls. As people always say, the last thing is that who pays the piper call the tune. So thanks a lot, Peter, and hail up Adonijah for me. If I don't know if he's still at the newspaper in Barbados.
Yeah, he hasn't been well, He hasn't been well.
All right, so just tell him.
He hasn't been well for a long time, so we have to remember him in your prayers. Yeah.
Yeah, man, that's my brother for years. You know, heal him up for me, please. And thanks a lot, and you bless us. And sister, and John, take care of yourself, man.
You too.
You
too. Thanks for calling.
One love. Yeah, Peter.
Quickly, Cecil, when Bongo Shaka called, I remembered something that I wanted to say, that one of my great regrets is that I haven't been able to do more developmental polling in the Caribbean. I have a utility outside of that. And when listening to him, I'm assuming that he's a Rastafarian.
Yes, he is.
He is, yeah. I remember that the Ganja issue was one where there was a Ganja commission, which I think Prime Minister Gonzalez was the leader that commissioned the Ganja Commission, and it was led by Dr. Anthony's wife, Rosemary Antoine. I was able to essentially put data that I collected on support for decriminalization of Ganja in all of the islands, St. Vincent included. I was happy that all of my political clients were willing to make that data available to the commission. So I was able to give the commission a picture of support for the decriminalization of Ganja in all of the islands. That was very, very different to what they imagined to be the case, because a big part of it was fear on their part that there was going to be a negative follow if they decriminalized. But I was able to help provide data from Dominica, St. Vincent, Barbados, all of the islands. It showed that in all instances, an overwhelming majority of people in the islands felt that there should be a decriminalization of Ganja. So that was one of the things I was happiest about, in the sense that that information was made available to the Ganja Commission free of cost. And essentially the people of the Caribbean were able to speak through CADRES to be able to make their views on this important issue known. They recommended a decriminalization, and I was happy that we could be part of that, because I think the Rastafarian community would have benefited significantly from that additional exposure. So there were some instances, and I'm happy that we could at least mention that one where there was a developmental aspect of the work that was facilitated, and we were happy when we could do that kind of thing, because it means that, you know, we can do some good.
All right. Well, Peter, one of the things you said is that you're going to be busy going forward with the rest of the year. And so if at any point in time you see the need to use our facility to share ideas or whatever, you know, you're free to anytime.
Okay, thank you.
Could you remind us as to the 8 elections for the year that you're talking about?
We already had Trinidad and Tobago. We already had Barbados was a by-election. We have to have Jamaica. We're gonna have St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, and there were a couple more. Suriname is supposed to be one of them. Anguilla, we already had Anguilla earlier in the year. I believe Montserrat is supposed to be one on the list as well. And then possibly Barbados early in 2026 will be also a possibility. So that's the basis of I don't know if that's all 8 of them, but those are the ones I remember offhand. So there's a fairly comprehensive list. Oh, we also had Antigua. Started off with an election early in the year, which was also landslide.
Yeah, well, we again the invitation is open to you. You know, in the past we have made people associates of our program. So we've made Dr. Justin Marshall Robinson. So we're happy to. So just feel free anytime you feel like.
Thanks again for spending the Sunday, and for giving me the chance to spend the Sunday with you, and also for these conversations that we're gonna have. And so, what to ask about St. Lucia?
We thank you very much. We thank you very much for agreeing to be on with us today. Of course, you have clarified important issues, and so a lot of instructions and learning we have gained from your interaction today. So thanks a lot. And we want to wish you the rest of the weekend, the rest of Sunday, pleasant one. And we look forward to hearing from you again sometime.
Okay.
All right, Peter. Thanks again.
Yeah, bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Well, Pijan, that was a good one.
Very quite instructive.
Yes, very. He's clarified a number of issues. And his willingness to talk, as Bongo Shaka was saying, unbiased and just talk freely, objectively. And we want to thank Lansford again for pointing to the issues more directly and to get a response from Peter. And again, in that interaction between Lansford and Peter, we've had a number of things clarified. They've enlightened a number of points that we've been struggling with. So we thank Lansford for chipping in and making things clear.
You started off by dispelling some information about a poll recently.
Oh yes, apparently I got wind from people who said that there was a poll. There was information going around anyway, saying that Peter Wickham did a poll, and it was showing in terms of results NDP 10, ULP 5.
And Peter Wickham clearly refuted that.
Yes, he just did. That's the reason to be honest, I contacted him. He did refute it when I contacted him. So I asked him if he wished to come to the program, and he agreed. So that's the main reason why he's on the program. But using him on the program to deal with larger, wider issues. But yes, Peter Wickham did refute that on the program this morning. He's not associated with any such poll. So I just want to, I'm glad you remind me of that. All right, so this has been a good one. I just want to, I'm so caught up with Ibrahim Traore that I have a song here to play, just to remind our listeners.
We stand with you. This one's for the people. This one's for the truth.
And this is Chris Brown, that American singer.
This world got your name now. Another one. I see the fire in the eyes of the youth. Standing tall, they defending the truth. We pray every night for the peace to grow. Hands to the sky for Burkina Faso. Hearts bleed, but we still gon' rise. soldier with an angel in disguise. Oh Lord, hear the cry of the land. God Troy with your mighty hand. God protect Ibrahim, he's standing strong in the storm. A warrior for the people, rising up to reform. Oh, Burkina, your spirit won't break. Let the heavens move mountains for your sake. We sing, we pray, we hope, we fight for freedom to shine like African light. God protect, oh God protect. Ibrahim Traoré, never neglect.
Boss moves with a legacy to build in the land of gold. Truth can get you killed, but the general rose like sunrise in the west. Got the people in his chest, heart beating through the vest. From the jungle to the palace, no fear in his tone. He ain't kneel to the tyrants, he protected his home. Money never bought loyalty in these streets. Only courage in the eyes of those fighting to eat. So I ride for the mission, honor the call. If God got his back, he'll never fall.
Yeah, every tear that falls, we
It's this song is a good way to end the program, but the message that somebody sent is not a good way to end the program. But said West Indies has lost another match. I wonder if he's right. I thought that match was supposed to begin at 1:30. But, I mean, looking at the post, who it's coming from, I think he's correct. West Indies has lost another match. Can you imagine that? Anyway, I want to thank especially Peter Wickham, distinguished Caribbean post and political scientist, for being on the program today. He has done a lot. And also thank Lansford Weeks for chipping in and really enlightening a lot of the points and making things clear for us all. And Peter and all the folks who've been listening to us, we thank them as well. And we thank Karen, as usual, for providing the able support to the program this morning. So, Peter, anything else you want to mention? All right. So, on your behalf and Lance and Karen's, my name is Cecil Ryan. Good afternoon.